We are just a minute after 1 o'clock Eastern time, so I will go ahead and begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Shayla Bottoms, and I'm one of the technical assistance specialists for the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network. Welcome to the Kin Mobilization Learning Collaborative. We are co-hosting this collaborative with one of our subject matter experts, Marina Nitsa of the Child Welfare Playbook. She's here with us today, and we'll keep an eye on the chat if anyone has questions or comments to share. I'll be dropping a few links in the chat so you all can access some resources, learn more about our work, and submit a request to us if you have any questions later regarding this session or other kinship-related topics. For today's session, we will hear from Jada Coleman and Patrick Pisani to discuss the 30 Days to Family model. So I will pass it to them to further introduce themselves and get started.
Thank you so very much. Welcome, everyone, and we're very excited to be here. Thanks so much to the Learning Collaborative for inviting us. And we've just had such a good time over the last several weeks and months being part of the collaborative and getting to know all of you as our colleagues a lot better, and just really enjoying kind of our ability and opportunity to put our heads together in this very, very important space with this very important work. So really excited to be here. Yeah, introductions. My name is Patrick Pisani. I am the Director of Replication and Coaching at the Institute for Child Welfare Innovation in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'll let Jada introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jada Coleman. I am the Director of Professional Development. So I do a lot of the trainings that are done here locally in assisting foster parents and resource parents, and also do a lot of the replication work with the 30 Days of Family program and supporting sites as well.
Okay, so we will kind of just jump into it, and we have some slides to share with you all. But at any point, feel very free to jump in, ask us questions in real time, obviously utilizing the chat to whatever degree that makes sense for you. And again, just really excited to share with you a little bit about our program and really just how it kind of fits into the wider theme of and the importance of family search and engagement being infused more proactively into our field in general. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, make sure I'm sharing the right one. So, all right. Some of you might have heard about 30 Days to Family before or not. Either way, again, excited to share a little bit of information with you. So 30 Days to Family, registered trademark, is an intense, fast-paced 30-day search for relatives and kin, beginning at the moment a child enters protective custody, or as we like to call it, day one. And of course, day one can be slightly different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but with the idea that we are getting in and starting to work with these families at the earliest possible moment of that child's time and care. Truly believing that every single day wasted that we're not doing family search and engagement for kiddos is just that, is a day wasted and a lost opportunity to tap into the sense of urgency and the sense of momentum that the very beginnings of these cases kind of afford us. We work really diligently to notify all identified family members for every child that we're servicing. And through that process, identifying placement options with the goal of trying to get as many of these kids that we're serving with family members as quickly as possible. And again, we've been, joining these sessions on this collaborative for a while now, and truly, I don't think I have to tell a lot of you guys that are part of this collaborative of the importance of that and knowing all the benefits that these kids and the families really in general are able to obtain because of having that relative placement in place. And that kids just do so much better when they can maintain those connections with family members despite having to come into the foster care system. And thirdly, outlining a network of relative supports and connections that promote placement stability and family involvement, and really outside of placement. One of the things that is really near and dear to our hearts is this idea that family connections should not be placement or bust, right? That even kids that for whatever reason have to remain in a traditional foster care setting or in a residential facility, that those kids, just as much as anyone else, need to be connected to and have the ability to maintain relationships with the important people in their lives. And we've seen in kind of the work that we've done around the country that a lot of places are really bought into the idea of relative placement. But if that child doesn't end up living with kin, then for whatever reason, they just are kind of cut off from all of those important people. And so I like to think of 30 Days to Family as kind of a relative connection program first and foremost. And of course, one of the awesome outcomes of that is the placement, but not sort of placement first and then the connection second. Like it's just as important. And again, I know most of us or all of us on this call wholeheartedly agree with those sentiments. So that's kind of the program in a nutshell, or our elevator pitch, if you want to think of it that way. Um, just a little bit about 30 Days to Family's history, in the sense that it's kind of important, just in sort of understanding the primary philosophies behind what it is we do. And so I mentioned that we're based in St. Louis, Missouri. Kind of the home site for 30 Days to Family is at the Foster Adoptive Care Coalition, where Jada and I both work. And it was launched back in 2011, so been up and running for about 13 years now. It seems like a long time, but also just yesterday, right? I can't believe that that amount of time has passed since the program was launched. And little bit of a rabbit hole here, but the program was influenced by another program at the coalition called Extreme Recruitment. And Extreme Recruitment, in a very nutshell kind of description, works with kids that are much farther along in their time in care, kids that are legally free for adoption or guardianship, and don't have prospects to be reunified in the near future. So these are kids that are, have been in care for years, sometimes decades. And essentially, Extreme Recruitment was influenced by the TV show Extreme Home Makeover. I never watched the show, but I've kind of been told the story secondhand. But the way I've heard it is that our executive director at the time was at home watching this show and thought to herself, like, man, if all of these people in the community can come together in this really urgent and exhaustive way and rehab this family's entire home in the course of a couple days, what if we kind of applied that same sort of mindset to permanency finding and trying to find resources, long-term stability resources for kids that have been in foster care? Long story short, they started doing this work, and as part of the Extreme Recruitment Program, we're doing family finding, family search and engagement. And as many of you can probably guess, we're finding a ton of relatives that very unfortunately had either never been contacted, or maybe were engaged earlier during that child's time in care, but had since been, kept on the outskirts. Maybe people that had tried to get custody of these kids in the past and had been excluded or ruled out because of background check issues or capacity of the team members, or 1,000 other reasons that we have really kind of alluded to over the last sessions in this collaborative. But tons of relatives that were basically like, of course I would love to help, but why didn't you contact me, or why wasn't I allowed to do so on day one of this child's time in care? Why are you calling me 2, 3, 5, 10 years after the fact and expecting me to kind of re-engage in this process now? Like, really, that's kind of unfair. But still, there were so many relatives that were able to assist, and people that were sort of reactivated that had been overlooked for so long. And so that's how they got the idea for 30 Days to Family was, hey, what if we did this work right at the beginning of a child's time in care? And then maybe if every child receives this type of service, you kind of eliminate the need for a program like Extreme Recruitment, because we're finding all of those connections, all of those supports, all of those important people as early as we can during a child's time in care. And so again, very nutshell kind of view, but that's kind of the process that led to the creation of the program, and the rest, as they say, has been history or current history, such as it is. And so the goals of family involvement, and again, a lot of this you all very wholeheartedly resonate with, as has been shown kind of over the last sessions that we've been a part of, that again, it's not just about placement, right? That every single child needs to be tapped in and maintain that connection to their culture, their history, traditions. Just because they've been brought into foster care does not mean that they don't have the right to be who they are and maintain the important connections to the people that they love, the places that they love, the things that they love. This idea of maintaining normalcy, right? And that when we bring children into foster care, that we have to recognize that we're not just removing them from their home, but we're removing them from their routines, their extracurricular environments, their friends, their ability to go, down the street and play street hockey with their buddies after school. My goodness, like I'm suddenly not able to go to my favorite barber shop, and that's the only place on the planet that gets my hair just right. And suddenly that piece has been stripped of me, and we as the professionals do what we can to try to maintain some of that normalcy. But, as we all know, so much of that is unfortunately removed. And hey, get a new barber. You're going to go to a new school. It's going to suck, but you'll figure it out. And too often, that's kind of the sentiment that we sort of, as a field, sort of project onto these kids without putting enough emphasis on that maintenance of normalcy. And this idea that if we're able to engage with the entire extended family network, they can help us with maintaining that normalcy, and they can create and establish solutions for us that take some of that obligation out of the hands of the professionals and give it back to the family because they know how to do it best anyway, right? Securing natural supports, identifying child-specific needs, kind of beyond the superficial. Of course, we spend a lot of time thinking about medical, mental health, educational needs. But what about that stuff that's a little bit less obvious and is kind of below the surface, like their baseball team or their, again, favorite barber shop or whatever it might be. So again, just kind of that emphasis that what we truly buy into in our program is so much more than just the placement aspect, of course, that being so important as well. And so through that process, we like to think of 30 Days to Family as being sort of a cog in this national or really kind of international movement towards more robust relative and kinship involvement in the lives of kids in foster care. And that we truly imagine ourselves waking up one day and, hey, the vast majority of kids that are in care are with relatives. Whereas I think last time we looked, I think the national placement rate was like 35% with relatives. And so if we could just flip that, right? How much different would the system look? How much different would our jobs look if we suddenly had a system that truly valued relatives to the extent that we know they should be? And prioritize that placement through policies and programs and things that have been brought up in this collaborative over the last several weeks and months. And so we've seen that system kind of slowly shifting, and there's been some momentum building towards, from a legislative standpoint or just policy and practice standpoint. And so we really challenge our 30 Days to Family specialists to not only bring themselves to a point where they are being that curious, confident systems advocate for change, but that they're able to influence others around them, that they might be the only one on this professional team that is willing and able to stand up at a team meeting and say, well, what about Uncle Billy? Don't really feel like he's been given a fair shake. And we kind of moved on from considering him for placement or just some type of involvement without really giving him a fair assessment and truly valuing what his existing relationship with that kid looks like. But no, he's got a DWI from 3 years ago. So sorry, not sorry, we'll talk to you later kind of sentiment. Not that we all are like thinking that actively, but we just know how the system works. And so many individuals are kept at a distance for the sake of safety without kind of digging in a little bit deeper. And so we truly encourage and empower our 30 Days to Family specialists to be confident advocates, to develop strengths-based, curious approaches to relative involvement when barriers do arise, and to proactively address and challenge our own biases, be them internal or be them systemic. And so really kind of seeing this program as just one piece of this larger movement towards systems change.
And I also want to say one of the things I think is really important that we do also make sure that we are making sure that specialists are confident and being advocates, but another piece is that we really make sure that we are supporting the families and helping them be advocates. I think it's really, as you all probably know, many times where family members feel as if they're not having a voice at the table or even brought to the table. And so it's really important as specialists to figure out how to make sure we're bringing the family members to the table. And when they're there, helping them advocate as well for themselves. Because the goal is, again, we're 30 days, we're in the family's life at that particular point, and then we conclude services, and maybe even less than that. And so we know that there are times where cases go on for quite some time, months, years. And so we need to make sure that we are empowering families as well to be able to advocate for themselves and showing them how to do that and having those deep one-on-one discussions with them on when there are barriers faced, how we can do that and how we address that. And we do that by sitting down with them and modeling what that looks like. So when we actually get to the table with the other team members who may be thinking why we can't, we're had the opportunity to sit down with family members to have them have the voice to show why can't we, and this is the reason why, and advocate for that piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the idea that we're kind of setting the stage that will, create the momentum that will continue long term for hopefully a shorter period of time that that child has to remain in care.
Exactly.
And so again, I throw this philosophy slide up there with the understanding that many of you, or if not all of you, are probably looking at some of these and thinking like, well, duh, and these are things that have been kind of shared as sentiments, again, in this collaborative kind of along the way. But again, we truly buy into all of these to a really intense level, and we'll use these philosophies as kind of our core advocacy points when things do get tough or when we're having to kind of challenge team members and try to ask them to think a little bit differently about how family members can be involved. Truly believing that every single youth has family members that are able and willing to care for them. Again, sounds kind of simple right off the bat, but I just think of my own experience and how many times, especially as a younger child welfare professional, being told this child has no one, this family has no one, they've burned all their bridges. There are no one, within their social. Why do you think these kids ended up in care? If they had supports, then these kids probably wouldn't have even been in this situation. And just how wrong that is, kind of over and over and over again that we've seen in our cases. And truly that even if grandparents, aunts and uncles, kind of that first sort of sphere of relatives aren't necessarily going to be approved for placement. What about great aunts and uncles, great grandparents, cousins, second cousins? We placed a child with a bus driver one time because we truly valued that that child had an incredibly strong relationship with that adult in their life and felt supported by them. And so really kind of challenging what the idea of family is and kind of extending our look at what, again, family can mean to that individual child. Um, and if we go out far enough, if you find 150, 200 people, someone in that system is going to be willing and able to help. And so it's not a matter of, it's just a matter of time sometimes and being able to put in that level of work to find those people that are a little bit more tricky to track down. Believing that every family is unique and that because of that, only the relatives themselves are the experts. And so a lot of what we do from an engagement standpoint is, humbling ourselves, trying to let go of those power dynamics and try to remind the family that we need their input, we need their expertise. And not just the moms and dads, right, but all of the extended relatives too. This child just came into care. We really don't know anything about them except for what's on this piece of paper regarding their medication or schooling situation. But what do we need to know at a bare minimum to make their time in foster care just a little bit more comfortable, if that's possible in any way? And so at every turn during 30 Days to Family, we are constantly reminding the relatives that their expertise is valued and not only appreciated, but instrumental in making this child's time in care as least traumatic as possible. That children deserve to be with their family and have that right to maintain that cultural and kinship connection. And that everyone, a personal favorite of mine on this list is that every single person has something to contribute. So, and again, we mean that very literally, in the sense that, hey, we are going to put in just as much effort to track down Uncle Billy, who we know is living on the streets and is homeless, and maybe has an issue with drugs. And, everyone in the family is telling us all these things. We're going to make just as many diligent attempts to track down him as we would Aunt Sally, who runs a daycare out of her house. And so we know she can probably pass background checks. And so we're not kind of playing favorites, for lack of a better way to put it, and kind of only focusing on the people that we know can contribute. Uncle Billy, maybe we can't approve him for placement if he's homeless and struggling with addiction, but he might be able to give us more family information, help us expand the genogram, tell us what that kid's favorite foods are, tell us what their bedtime routine looks like. Explain to us kind of some family dynamics that are pretty tricky that we need to be aware of as we're reaching out to more people. So, truly, if we're valuing the expertise of the family, we have to assume that every single person can contribute something. Not that they always will, but we have to give them that opportunity. A story I like to tell with that philosophy during one of my early 30 Days to Family cases, I discovered that there was a grandpa that was serving a life sentence for murder. And he had been in there for like 10 or 15 years already, and had no parole, had no prospects to get out. And I know that if I think about myself as a much younger social worker, there's no way I would have made time or had time to reach out to that grandpa and have like an in-depth conversation, right? Like he's in prison, he's been there for a number of years, he hasn't seen these kids in forever, like what can he possibly help me with? And so why don't I prioritize the people I know can assist? Well, I ended up calling this gentleman and spent about 4 hours on the phone with him. He talked to me about a lot of things that weren't necessarily in relation to his family, but he also gave me like the names and numbers for like 35 people that I hadn't identified before. One of them ended up being his sister, so the great aunt on the case that ultimately ended up caring for the kids. I'm not sure if I would have found her without talking to him, but again, just kind of case in point that like if we're able and willing to kind of set aside our assumptions and our biases really about what people can do, that it's incredible the results that might happen. And again, he wasn't going to be approved replacement, but he can contribute something. And we need to kind of get to a point where we as a field, as a profession, are valuing the input of all these family members, regardless of what their specific circumstance might be. That active family participation is essential for good outcomes, and of course, that families are entitled to respect from the child welfare system. Again, I think we would all agree to that point, but what does that really mean as we're kind of processing this stuff in our day-to-day work?
Well, I would say my favorite philosophies are the all families are entitled to respect from the child welfare system, but also children deserve to be with their family and have a right to maintain those kinship and cultural connections. I know that we are focused on making sure that children have the mental health needs met, medical needs, and everything else, but we forget about those cultural connections, which are a lot of times being missed within the work of trying to make sure everything else is stable. And if we would allow family members to come along and share what those connections are and allow them to be a part of the process and planning how that can happen and work through how it can be done, it would be so that children would not lose that right. And also the first one I said, all families are entitled to respect. When I first started out in the child welfare field, you can see, well, maybe you didn't. I did. I saw that a lot of family members were really not respected when they were coming to family support meetings, or they were coming to court hearings. You can see it in the way that professionals talk to them. You can see it in the way where people did not allow them to voice their thoughts, talking over them, rushing them, all those little things. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not trying to do it explicitly. Maybe it was something that was a bias of them, but not allowing them to have a voice and a lot of the kids that come into care, their families may not have that experience of what the child welfare system is or understand it fully. And there was a lot of times where professionals were not providing a little bit more time to explain what the process was so that whoever the family members are who wanted to be involved felt as if they understood where they were and how they can best support their family members. And I think that piece was missed a lot. And I remember being in family support team meetings and watching and seeing how, a few times where I stopped the meeting and family support team meetings and thinking, we are talking at the parents and not talking with them. We're talking to everyone else except for the parents and getting just the views of foster parents or resource parents. It was shocking to see that. And so I think as professionals, as we go out and do the work, yes, we may not be disrespectful, but there may be some people who are, and making sure that we are advocating for family members who are touched by the system in some way.
Absolutely. And so kind of an extension of that philosophy, and this kind of gets into a little bit more of what the program tangibly does on a day-to-day basis as we're providing services. So we truly buy into this idea of urgency and exhaustiveness, right? Like, what would we do? What would we expect if our own loved ones, if our own children were in foster care? And I think if a lot of us stop to think about what we truly would want if our own kids or our own loved ones were in care, the current again, macro level child welfare system just doesn't quite live up to what our expectations would be as far as information and involvement and participation, really. And so we work quickly. Regular business hours don't apply. When a 30 days to family worker starts a case, they might work 10 or 12-hour days on that first day, not stopping at 5, because if it was our own kids, we wouldn't stop at 5 o'clock, right? Not that we're calling people at 1 o'clock in the morning either, but we are just truly trying to encapsulate and live and breathe that meeting them where they are philosophy and concept that so many of us hold dear in our work. And again, trying to tap into the momentum that kind of naturally exists in the early parts of these cases. And so Jada kind of illustrated this next point really beautifully with this idea of partnering with the family, humbling ourselves and trying to remove those toxic power dynamics that are kind of ingrained within our system naturally. And so, again, we need your input. You are the expert, not us. Who should we call next? Who is important to you? Let's set aside what the legal definition of relative is and focus on the important people in your life. And let's figure out a way to make sure that even if they can't provide placement, that you can maintain those relationships, even if it doesn't look perfect on paper, right? Because whose families are perfect, right? I think we can all think of relatives that we all have that we hold near and dear to our hearts, that maybe some of them have background check issues, right? That maybe some of them have I don't know, things that would be of concern if they were being assessed by the child welfare system. But we don't cut them out of our lives, right? And we maintain those connections because they're important parts of who we are. And so our kids deserve that as well. Valuing all sides of the family tree equally. Siblings, all adult and minor siblings are contacted and engaged with. If they're minor siblings, we're engaging with their caregiver first, obviously. And then punitive paternal relatives. So gone are the days where, hey, we're trying to find dad on this case. We sent a certified letter to his last known address, and hopefully he gets back to us. And that's what we call diligent efforts, right? And so even if we have no idea who dad is and we only have a name or even two names of who the possible father is, we're engaging with that side of the family tree just as rigorously as we would on mom's side, trying to help figure out who dad is and establish paternity. But again, also establishing those relationships above like what the blood relationship means. Um, Having a strengths-based, curious approach to assessment, barrier busting, and advocacy. Does Uncle Billy's DWI from 5 years ago truly mean that he's inappropriate for placement? Or can we get creative? Can we get curious? What would it look like if he was approved? And is that something we can attain if we get a little bit creative and think outside the box a little bit? And so a lot of what we do is kind of challenging things just from that perspective. prioritizing natural supports over paid and professional services. So if we can get aunt, uncle, cousin approved for respites, for transportation assistance, for financial supports, to help with resources, obviously that alleviates some of the burden on our professional resources we use, but we know that that kind of network is much more sustainable, transferable, and unconditional. So not only for the 30 days or so that we're working with that family, but for their entire time in foster care, plus some. When they go home and they transition back to mom and dad, they're going to need a ton of supports. And who better to provide that than the natural family members themselves? And so a lot of what we do is kind of like rebuilding bridges that might have been burned or damaged in some way over the course of time. Again, I mentioned already that broad definition of family. We follow the relationships, not the legal definition. If mom tells us that her best friend from college is basically a sister to her, then we're going to treat her like an aunt the same way we would any blood related aunts. Again, I mentioned we placed kids with bus driver before, coaches, neighbors, other school personnel. Um, the parents of siblings, of half siblings, or adopted siblings. And so again, we get really, really creative. And one of our first questions is always, what does family mean to you? Who are the members of your family? And encourage the relatives themselves not to think just along the lines of who they're related to by blood. And again, remembering and kind of encouraging all of our folks that if we're truly committed to like a DEI approach, relatives must and have to be invited and welcome to the table. And again, Jada kind of illustrated that point perfectly in kind of these all too familiar scenes where we kind of see mom, dad, maybe a couple other relatives kind of in the corner of the meeting, just sort of like obviously confused, obviously being talked over, and not really being invited to the actual conversation. And so we really try to get rid of that idea. And I love like, incidentally, in past sessions of this collaborative, we've talked about like the 3-to-1 ratio that I think a county in Michigan is implementing. That kind of thing is so philosophically aligned with what we're trying to do in this program that it's just really, really awesome to kind of see these ideas spreading more and more across the country. Just a little bit about the importance of urgency. And again, I probably don't have to tell many of you guys this, but again, we're working with these families on the very first days of their time in care, knowing that when the child has just entered the system, there's a lot of hurt, a lot of fear and confusion, but the relatives also have recent memories. I just saw that kiddo last week. We had a barbecue and him and the whole family came over. My goodness, what happened during that amount of time? And the family members, to whatever extent, and maybe it's not always perfect looking, have been trying to support one another and are concerned about the fact that these kids just came into care. Whereas the longer that child remains in the system, of course, resentment and distrust builds on top of maybe what was already there on day one. But if we know, of course, the relatives have been isolated from each other. I haven't seen that kiddo in 10 years. What? How dare you call me now and expect me to be involved? Bottom line is we know that this work is important regardless of how long that child's been in care. And whether they've been in care 1 day or 10 years, they still deserve this robust and exhaustive family search and engagement work. But the earlier we can get in, the better. And the more of these things we can do on day one is really what we try to buy into in this model. And so now just a little bit about kind of more nuts and boltsy aspects of the program, just to kind of give you an idea of what our desired program outcomes are. So on every single case, we will build a genogram that goes out through what we call the 4th generation. So that would be your great grandparents. And to even kind of like put a finer point on that, here's, and is the genogram showing?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So this is an example of an actual 30 days to family genogram, redacted for names and full birth dates and that kind of thing. But you get an idea of just kind of the extent to which our specialists are able to expand these trees. So if I zoom really far out, you'll see that this is the one kiddo right here. And then here's maternal side, and then here's paternal side. And so when we're talking about the 4th generation, we mean, here's dad, here's paternal grandma, and then here's the great grandparents. And in this specific case, we actually even went another generation farther. But again, kind of to piggyback off that earlier point, that every single child has relatives that are willing and able to care for them if we look hard enough. So maybe we're not necessarily going to find people that are, aunts and uncles or kind of those closer relatives that can be approved. But when we get out this far on the family tree, we inevitably will find someone that can help. And again, even if it's not placement, just people that these folks or that these kids can stay connected to. And so that just kind of illustrates what some of our genogramming work looks like. And so we identify at least 80 relatives, and more often than not, an average of about 150 on every single case. Now, that doesn't always include adults that we're able to engage with. That's minor children, that's deceased individuals. And so, not that we're reaching out to 150 people, although, hey, weirder things have happened. I've seen genograms with 600 people on them in 30 Days to Family, depending on how many parents we have and how large the sibling group is and that kind of thing. But again, just really taking the idea of family search and engagement kind of well beyond what we think of in a traditional sense. Um, Identifying a primary relative placement option for 98% of the kids served, identifying at least one backup option for 75%, two backups for 45%. And our goal is to place 70% of the children served with relatives by the conclusion of services. So at least by that 30-day mark. But as Jada kind of mentioned before, not all of our services will last a full 30 days. If we can accomplish this in 5 days, then hey, 5 days to family. Let's close up and take another case. And again, wanting to conclude our services within that 30 calendar days. But there are situations where we have to go beyond that. There are situations where we have to place a case on hold, waiting for ICPC or something like that to go through. But again, on average, we're trying to get these cases worked on, done, and then move on to the next child that's coming into care with an established plan and kind of next steps created for the rest of the team to take as long as that child remains in the system. So, yeah, just kind of what we're aiming for in a nutshell.
And I also want to say, using a genogram is really helpful, and learning how to use the program was even more interesting for me as a 30 Days Family Specialist when I first started out. But I think it was, for those who are visual learners, it's really helpful because it allows you to see where you are as far as identifying or contacting family members. Many times I would have a lot of people on the maternal side, and I'm like, I'm missing this paternal side of the family, and it's just as important. And it's so important to have that equal side, hopefully identified, and also not just identified, but also contacting the paternal side. Because as we know, a lot of paternal family members are kind of left out. They don't know sometimes what's going on as much. Even personally within my own family, I've seen it out, played out as well. I know there are some questions in the chat. How many family members or how many families does a specialist work with at one time? Typically, the specialist takes two cases at a time. Initially, when they're first starting out, it's just the one in order to get their footing and understand how the program works. And then they take two with an average of 30 some cases a year, if you're thinking about two cases on average a month. And as Patrick was stating, we do that really intensively. So we are working on that case, especially those first few days of a case, really intensely, meaning I know this, my supervisor will be like, "Are you ready for another case?" I'm like, "Yes, bring it on," because I know I'm going to have some long nights, only because I'm making sure that I have to meet with family members when they're available. So if I have a court hearing at 8, I'm not stopping at 5. I still want to go at 6:30 to meet with this family member to discuss how they want to be connected and stay connected with the child. But hopefully that answers that question. What if paternity has not been established? We have had that as well. But I always like to say, okay, well, is there a connection between the paternal family members and the child? I feel like that still can. To me, there are many family members who I've talked to on the paternal side of the family who would say it doesn't matter if there's a paternity test or not, that is still my niece. That is still my granddaughter. That is still my nephew. I want to be involved. And so that's what I'm going to advocate for as well. How does a caseworker get in touch with the specialist? So as far as the referral piece, typically anybody can refer a case to the 30 Days of Family program. Typically it's a caseworker, so there's depending on the site, there's either a phone call that can be made, there can be a form that's filled out. There have been times where I'm leaving my house and my supervisor is like, I just got a call from a caseworker and I need you to go to court. We have a case that may need 30 days of family services. I haven't got all the information yet. Can you go there and meet with the team and the family? Yeah, I'm on my way. And in that case, we will get that information on the back end. We just want to make sure we're there to support initially when that case is coming in. So it comes in various ways, but typically, yes, from a caseworker. Is there an option for the child who has been in the system for a long time and can haven't been identified? So with the 30 Days of Family program, we are, which it speaks to this slide. This is when a child is just entered into care, or maybe they have returned home, but then they re-enter into care. So we are typically there when the custody is taken, protective custody is taken of that child. And so there are some sites who will work with various agencies in order to support those kids who have been in care for some time. I believe the practices and the philosophies that we have with the 30 Days of Family program can definitely be applied at different points in time. But for the fidelity of the 30 Days of Family program, it is when the child is initially placed into foster care.
Yeah, to that point, and to your question, Maria, it's kind of that double-edged sword of having sort of an evidence-based model where, as designed, it has to be on day one. But as we kind of previously noted, and Jada just talked about, we know that this stuff works if you start on day two or day three or day 10, right? And so it at a certain point becomes kind of a semantic thing about like, okay, well, if we got the referral on day two, we can't technically call it 30 days to family. But every single child deserves those services. And so we've seen a number of sites that we're doing replication work with. Hey, hey, try to send us this referral a little bit earlier next time, but we will take this as kind of an unofficial case and work it sort of the same way and provide those services again, whether we got that referral on day two or day 10. Because yeah, it's again kind of that it's great to have that evidence based because it allows us to get more funding and all those things. But yeah, the flip side of that coin is that it's pretty specific as far as the eligibility requirements to call it this, right? So great questions. And just to circle back real quick to this idea of the caseload. So as Jada mentioned, we have two cases at a time, and an infant, a single child, or a sibling group of 9 is all considered one case. And a lot of people kind of get aghast when they hear that we only have two cases at a time. Hey, this is child welfare. We're used to having 50 kids on our caseload, And so we truly emphasize the idea of the quality over quantity when it comes to the caseloads. And it's having that low caseload that allows us to go to that great depth and to find 80 plus people and to, when we get into kind of placement assessment, kind of parse out all of the nuanced challenges that relative caregivers face. And so, again, as Jada mentioned, it still allows us to serve about 35 to 40 kids per year on average, at least what the data has shown us, because not every case will go a full 30 days. And if we can conclude and jump in to help another family, then we're able to do so. But truly, that low caseload size is what allows us to kind of do this work. And I see, how many specialists do you have? Great question. So that just kind of depends on our various sites. So here in St. Louis, we have a team of 5. They're not fully staffed right now. They're kind of in a transition, but typically one supervisor oversees a team of 5. And the supervisor is a solely dedicated 30 days to family supervisor. And again, each of those specialists is able to serve about 35 to 40 kids per year. So I'm bad at math, so I don't know what that comes out to. But that being said, a number of our other sites are kind of all constructed just a little bit differently. We have one site that has just one specialist and is overseen by a supervisor that has other obligations. We have another one that has three, another one with four. We kind of base the size of the team off kind of the jurisdictional need. You know, how many kids are coming into care, what percentage of those kids are already going with relatives, and try to kind of figure out the capacity from that standpoint. Great questions, guys. Um, yeah, the kind of rolling over then kind of from that eligibility into sort of, and again, very nutshell, and we say quote unquote typical case activities, right? No case has ever looked like this, right? There's always nuances and there's always wrenches that get thrown into things. But more or less, on the very first day of services, we're attending that initial hearing to begin engaging with relatives immediately, working with the team and the family to gather all of the child-specific need info. So, hey, that afternoon when we're talking to great uncle and he says, I'm interested in placement, what do I need to know? We can have an educated conversation about what that child needs. And schedule our barrier meeting, which is a 30 Days to Family facilitated meeting kind of in the middle of our services, where the team comes together to kind of process how the case is going. And on the very first day of services, we have contact attempts with all priority contacts. And so that includes the youth themselves, all parents, all grandparents, all aunts and uncles, and all siblings. And so some places, that's the entire extent of their family search and engagement process. But in 30 Days to Family, that's what we do on day one. And for the folks that we make attempts on and can't reach on day one, we have continued efforts throughout the life of our services. So, hey, on day one, I tried to call grandma. Maybe I swung by her house and knocked on the door, didn't get any answer. On day two, I'm trying a couple other things. Daily diverse efforts are what we try to encourage. And so that way, when we wake up on day 2 and 3, we're already reaching out to great aunts and uncles and cousins and folks of that nature. By the end of the first week, we've expanded the genogram through the 4th generation. Every single adult living relative receives a contact attempt at a bare minimum. Whether you're an uncle or a third cousin, if we identify you, then you're getting some kind of attempted call, because you deserve to at least be notified. You know, we got a lot of relatives who say, hey, I don't know my third cousins. I appreciate the info, but I don't want to be involved right now. Okay, thanks, but no thanks. You know, appreciate the call. Hey, that's great, fine. But at least we notified them, and no relatives can then come back years later and say we were never kind of given the opportunity. That door was never open for us. And we're identifying placement options and supports, and advocacy with the team. And then if we get to week 2 or 4, you know, sometimes we'll conclude services earlier. Continuing contact efforts, we hold our barrier meeting, placement occurs if it hasn't already, and we'll conclude services. All wrapped up nicely, easy peasy, right? If it only worked this smoothly as this as this goes every single case. And so roadmap to family. And so I don't know, Jada, if you might be able to drop the link to this document into the chat. And so this document is kind of our bread and butter of the program, and we make it available for any agency or any professionals to take, tear apart, utilize parts of it, if it's helpful at all in your own work. But kind of the main outcome, or the main output rather, of the program is this roadmap to family, which kind of lists all of the placement options and supports. And those supports, again, because they're natural, are tapping into the sustained, unconditional people that are going to be around long term. And that kind of thing takes, takes obligations off of the professional's plate. So, hey, I remember being a caseworker and getting a call on a Friday afternoon that, like, so and so needed respite immediately, and I'm trying to put out fires and desperately get a hold of a resource before I leave for the weekend. What if, you know, that provider is able to just pick up this roadmap to family and say, hey, 30 Days to Family identified 4 relatives that are all willing to do respite. Let me just reach out on my own. And then, hey, that case manager doesn't have to worry about that aspect, or at least not as often. So that's kind of one of the beautiful parts about this model too, is that we're creating these support plans that can allow the rest of the professional team members to focus on all the other aspects of the case. And we try to be really detailed, so it's not just Uncle Billy can provide support. Call me with whatever you need. It's Uncle Billy can provide respite 3 out of 4 weekends of the month. Don't call him on the third weekend of the month because he does ROTC and won't be available that weekend. So, to whatever extent, we're trying to get the finer details of that type of involvement so that those relatives don't just live as a piece of paper in that case file that never actually get utilized. And again, this document, amongst other things, is provided to the entire professional team and to the caregiver at the end of our services. I know we're kind of running a little on time, and I saw a couple other questions, but just to kind of zoom through some of these pieces. Like we mentioned, 30 Days to Family is an evidence-based model. And Jada, I don't know if you can maybe drop the link to our evidence and outcomes page on the website into the chat as well. But hey, we know it works. It's been studied a couple times. And we know that kids served by the program are more likely to be placed with kin. They spend fewer days in care, fewer moves while in care. So as you can see in Missouri, 81% less likely to change placements after getting with relatives. There's cost savings associated with that because these kids are going home quicker and not having to go to higher needs relative or foster homes and things of that nature. Reduced treatment placements. And so again, we're really kind of proud that the studies have really reflected what we've known about the model for many years now. And just a couple of last little nuts and bolts things. We are rated by 2 clearinghouses in the United States. Most recently and kind of most excitingly, the Title IV-E Prevention Services as a well-supported program, which allows us to tap into FFPSA funding for replication work. And we're also rated in the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse with high child welfare relevance as promising research evidence. So again, we're just very proud of those ratings and allows us to take this type of work to more places all over the country. And just a little bit about our replication efforts. We provide a 3-phase replication process for agencies or entities or states or counties that are wanting to replicate the model. We have a goodness of fit assessment to make sure that the program is going to kind of mesh with the existing culture and processes there. And then our institute provides intense technical support and coaching for years after the site starts replicating the model. So they know and are able to call us and receive coaching and advice on cases in real time. Our newest site in Monterey County, California, they just started taking cases a couple months ago, and Jada and I have been on calls basically every day with them, just like, hey, how's the case going? Let's look at the genogram, let's brainstorm together. And then our support kind of tapers off the more and more comfortable the site gets and the more confident they are with the program tenants. And this is just a list of our current replication sites. At Foster Adoptive Care Coalition is where we're at. A couple other sites within Missouri, and then we have sites at Michigan and Minnesota. And I mentioned our most recent one in California. So I meant to give more time for questions. I realize it's 12:53, so I apologize. But here's our information for what it's worth. If you want to talk about this program anymore or interested in replication or just want to chat, you can reach out to us at any time. So,
yeah. I mean, you guys answered questions as we went along, so I think you crushed it there. I think that's great.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Patrick and Jada, for all the valuable information you shared, and everyone here for joining us today. Our next session is scheduled for Thursday, October 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic will be amplifying youth voice through practice tools. There were lots of great questions today, and I'm sure you all may have more. So in case you miss it in the chat, I will drop the link again to our technical assistance form. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.